And get the truth out. What is the real truth?
Who put that secrecy provision, brought to light by Fox Business, in the financial regulation law?
When the President Obama signed into law July 21st, 2010, the new FinReg laws of the country, there was a stipulation in one of the pages where the Security Exchange Commission would have secrecy if it involved surveillance.
Legislation as increasing transparency. You can get inside, you can see what's going on, he says. But Fox Business has discovered a provision in the law that suggests otherwise.
The House passed its version of a financial overhaul. That bill did not have the SEC provision. The Senate later passed its version, the SEC provision, nowhere in that bill.
All the news media outlets to follow up on this story about the SEC and find out who put them laws into the language, because when the House of Representatives passed the bill and the Senate passed the bill, there was no such language.
So, if they have messed up, so to speak, Congress, you're surprised, right? You're shocked. SEC, no, if the SEC has messed up, yes, you cannot file, according to this new rule, you cannot file a Freedom of Information Act and find out what they did wrong.
Bingo. You can file it and they can say, sorry, not complying.
This particular provision is, but nonetheless it is Section 9291 of the FinReg bill that the President just signed into law. And this is essentially what happens. The SEC is given grossly new powers. And remember, the SEC didn't do a real good job uncovering the Bernie Madoff scandal, but now their powers have enhanced. But it's almost like a blanket has been put over the SEC, because the public will now be prohibited from getting its eyes on documents, because Section 9291 apparently empowers the SEC to say no to virtually all Freedom of Information Act requests. And this is despite President Obama saying that when it comes to financial regulation, he's all about transparency.
In an era of transparency, this is
like the Obama administration.
This is scary stuff, really, to be honest.
This is Satan in a Sunday hat. Yeah. It's just not pretty.
Yeah, just trying to point out the secrecy, not only with the SEC, but also with the news media. I'm trying to tell you the biggest story and the biggest lawsuit in the history of the world. And no U.S. news media company has covered this story except for one, a writer on SatWaves named Brandon Matthews. Before that, there was 2 YouTube videos from The Aliana Show.
Now, have you heard of a $3.87 trillion lawsuit against the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission Chairman, Marielle Shapiro, as well as several other current and former SEC commissioners? Probably not. It's presented as the largest fraud case in world history, and it's happening right here in the U.S.
First part of this story I want to talk about with CMKM Diamonds is about a sting operation that took place in 2004.
Now, I'm going to give you a key statement here of the case. They say that during the period of June 1st, 2004 through October 28th, 2005, a total of 2.25 trillion phantom shares of CMKM Diamonds Inc. was sold into the public market through legitimate brokers, illegitimate brokers, and dealers, market makers, hedge funds, ex-clearing transactions, and private transactions.
But the extreme abuses that are reflected in securities being chronically listed on Reg Show's threshold security list for months and years at a time is ample evidence that there is also fraud in the market that needs to be arrested. Periodically, there are reports that following a legitimate purchase of 100% of the outstanding shares of a microcap company, millions of phantom shares continue to be traded by naked short sellers.
The primary regulator of Wall Street is the Securities and Exchange Commission. We call the SEC kept in place trading rules that let speculators and hedge funds turn our markets into a casino. They allowed naked short selling, which simply means you can sell stock without ever owning it. They eliminated last year an important rule called the uptick rule that has protected investors for 70 years. Speculators pounded the shares of even good companies into the ground. The chairman of the SEC serves at the appointment of the president, and in my view, has betrayed the public trust. If I were president today, I would fire him.
In January 2010 by lawyer Al Hodges in paragraph 32. At some date prior to June 1st, 2004, the Securities and Exchange Commission, in concert with the Department of Justice of the United States, together combined with Robert Mayhew and others to utilize CMKM Diamonds Incorporated for the purpose of trapping a number of widely dispersed entities and persons who were believed to be engaged in naked short selling of CMKM Diamonds Incorporated stock and seller box in the company. The Securities and Exchange Commission and the Department of Justice, with assistance from the Department of Homeland Security, believed and developed evidence that said short sellers were utilizing their activities to illegally launder monies, wrongfully export monies, avoid payment of taxes, and to support foreign terrorist operations. As basically the sting operation was an operation put into effect through the Office of Homeland Security, the Department of Justice, and the SEC commissioners.
Sting operation that was conducted in 1999-2000. It identified about 200 companies that have been victims of counterfeiting of the stock market. It also identified Wall Street firms that were working with crime families to launder the money offshore. The only problem with that operation is that they didn't go after any Wall Street perpetrators. There was crime family members convicted of the crimes for aiding them, but the Wall Street firms all got off. And then you go into the CMKX sting, which is years later, and there's been no perpetrators going to jail for that sting either. And now, going forward to right now, they've counterfeited the bond market into the trillions, and now just recently came out that gold and silver's been counterfeited into the trillions as well, all by the same perpetrators, none of them going to jail.
Because we had the commodities, we had the oil, the uranium, the diamonds, everything, potash, we had it all.
Yeah, so basically, like you said, we had all them minerals and the diamonds, uranium, and the government stepped in to protect these valuable things because these counterfeiters, these people from all across the world, the criminals, would come in naked short and sell counterfeit shares, destroy the company like they did thousands of other companies, and then come in with their lawyers legally and take the company. And then they would take their minerals and price, send them to Iran and Iraq. So I think that's why the government did step in to protect this company. And the government talks about transparency, yet the SEC is trying to pull off a fast one with secrecy and the Freedom of Information Act not to reveal the information about possibly the world's largest lawsuit with CMKM Diamonds. With this new FinReg rule, there's a loophole in the system that will allow the SEC to keep secrets about this surveillance of this operation, this sting operation.
The SEC has aided and abetted the counterfeiting by also making rules that make it easy to counterfeit, but also by concealing the crime.
Here's another part of the transcript where Al was speaking to the judge. They did it because there was evidence by the government and by others associated both directly and indirectly with the government that this money was being sent offshore. It was being accumulated by the hedge funds offshore. It was being sent to Iraq. It was being sent to Iran. It was being sent to Afghanistan. And it was being sent to Hezbollah. This was one of the means in which these terrorist organizations were utilizing them to fund their operations.
The lawsuit is not against the United States Securities and Exchange Commission per se. It's against the individuals that are actually running it.
By everybody, lied to by the SEC. I filed complaints with the FBI, RCMP, SEC. They all not only lied to us, but are very condescending to the general public.
This sting operation took place, and the real purpose behind it was to follow the money trail and trace it back to terrorists.
And what is being presented in the lawsuit is allegations that a sting operation was essentially set up using this company, using characters that were known within CIA and FBI circles. Bob Mayhew, who is a lawyer with roots in the CIA and FBI, to use a sting operation to basically entrap criminal wrongdoers that were selling unregistered shares of stock to people who thought that they were actually buying real shares.
I was also a CMKM shareholder, and I had put my certificate away thinking that the company was naked short sold and the company went bankrupt. I figured I lost my money. Shareholder to the biggest story in the history in my eyes of counterfeiting and naked short selling. And after talking to Tom for 10 minutes, I look around the house for 10 minutes and I finally find this certificate and I show him on the screen, Tommy, here it is, I'm a shareholder. And I'm showing him the cert. I had bought it in 2004 and just put away and forgot about it.
Why did the SEC use a company to entrap wrongdoers when people were investing in it? Regardless of whether or not the company was a fraud, the SEC is there to protect investors. And when people are putting their money into stocks, they have a right and a need to know that their money is going where they say it is.
I feel these people are heroes. And the SEC, what they did to stop a global ban on naked short selling, counterfeit shares on Wall Street. In my eyes, they're heroes. But now with these new FinReg laws in place, which may allow the SEC to secretly hide this information and the possibility of stealing the wealth off the CMKM shareholders, and I'm one myself, this is not to be allowed to happen.
Unconstitutional! Money was collected, pursuant to crimes that were committed in exchange for immunity, and that the SEC has allegedly collected those funds. The shareholders are led to believe that that money was meant to be for them, and that those funds are not being distributed. And they're making the assumption that, in line with the Fifth Amendment of the Constitution for personal property rights, they're being deprived of their personal property. They have a claim here. Constitution. But if this does go to a discovery process and a trial, and the plaintiffs are able to come forward and produce evidence backing up these claims, that presents a whole can of worms for investors everywhere. Because if it's true that the Securities and Exchange Commission has allowed a sting operation to operate within a company that people thought was real, that was publicly traded, the question there is this still happening, and can it happen again?
One of the important parts of Al Hodges talking to the judge on August 2nd that I think is when he says, my understanding is that it went on for some number of months, but ultimately the SEC commissioners prevailed and convinced Mr. Mayhew and his associates that it had to be their decision because only they and the rest of the government could determine when this thing had fulfilled its function.
Through this sting operation, in a meeting in Las Vegas, essentially a whole bunch of criminal wrongdoers were brought together and they were given an option. Pay us a certain amount of funds based on the number of unregistered shares that have been sold, and we won't prosecute you. Now, some evidence that is within this lawsuit, and per the filing attorney, Al Hodges, he says he has a witness who was in that room. They say they can prove that up to 2.25 trillion unregistered shares have crossed over the markets.
I was reading the court transcript, Tom, from August 2nd when Al Hodges was speaking to the judge, where he said they had a room about 3 times the size of your courtroom, in which they had representatives from all of these brokerages from all over the world. They watched the video presentation because Mr. Mayhew, as the court may be aware, was at one time closely associated with the CIA, Howard Hughes, and all kinds of other people.
The judge said, remember the judge said, is that the same Bob Mayhew?
Yeah, he said that.
His CMKM Diamonds had a commodity, and they had the goods and the value for these people to be able to do what they did. We had the commodity to pull the sting off.
Because it had diamonds and uranium?
We had the value. We had something that was worth something.
What was everything in there?
In that room, and they had to negotiate a price to pay. That's why it's probably so high, 3.87 trillion, because we had...
As the evidence came out and you taught me more and more, and I dug into the case, that I'll never forget, July 12th, when that filing by Al Hodges came out and he explained about the terrorist and funneling of the money to these countries, and also all these hedge funds managers in this room in Las Vegas. I was just totally shocked at how big of a story this was.
Like Al Hodges said in that lawsuit, that everybody signed. So
because they were all busted, they were counterfeiting shares of the company.
That's why CMCX was used as the sting. He basically gave in the first two in the complaint and the follow-up on it, he basically explained everything that happened in that room with all the other bankers and hedge fund people and all the people, the terrorists, how they had to, you know.
What happens in Vegas stays in Vegas, but next month, September 2010, the truth is going to be revealed on who was in them rooms in Las Vegas, and it's all going to be court documentation based on Al Hodges, our lawyer, submitting to Judge Selner. What's selling besides the CMKM story was the manipulation of the news media when they ask him a question like Mary Shapiro about naked short selling on a YouTube video. She just ignored the question, and the media will twist naked short selling and short selling.
That's unconstitutional.
Yeah, so the reason why we're making this movie is because there are currently with CMCX supposedly about 40,000 shareholders involved in the stocks, and a lot of them are in the Paltalk rooms. There's it goes into paltalk.com, business and finance, and then you go into investments, and there's several CMCX rooms. You have the info room. That one is owned by this guy named Jack Berg. Password is dollars. You got another room that's owned by Mona Lisa Smiles, and that room, you know, all these rooms have 400 or 500 people.
I'd like to discuss what is called the BIS, which is the Bankers International Settlement. There is supposed to be some kind of settlement going on worth trillions of dollars to pay back people from all over the world.
We've now had a crisis, a terrible crisis, the worst since the 1930s, and we now have the political possibility, well, we've now done it because we've enacted financial reform, but financial reform is imperative. I don't believe it was politically possible because of the interests of Wall Street. And now that we've had the crisis and had financial reform, I think we've taken very meaningful actions.
So you support this bill?
The reform bill. Yeah, I think on the whole, not in totality, in the whole I support it. What they didn't do in the bill, and needs to be done, and they can do this themselves without doing it internationally, although it would be better to do it internationally, would be to greatly increase capital and margin requirements on derivatives, which is what I recommended in my book in 2003, and what I believed when I was still at Goldman Sachs. And we need to have higher capital requirements, not just for derivatives, but also more broadly for financial institutions. And that's not in this bill, but it's supposed to come out of the Bank of International Settlements, the BIS, and that's supposed to be sometime in the not-too-distant future.
Yeah, I'm just reaching out to the American people and the world, hoping you'll help tell the story along with all the other CMKM shareholders that have been fighting to seek the truth, including my good buddy Tommy. Help us tell the story and get the truth told. Be active through the Paltalk bulletin boards where there's 300 and 500 shareholders in this room gathering information. The CMKM do not get their money stolen from them from the SEC if that is in fact what they're trying to do. We had Watergate years ago, and if this story has to go forward with a court case and Al has to submit these names of these criminal bankers that were stealing the money through counterfeiting, and some of that counterfeit money led to terrorists, all hell is going to break out in this country, and we're going to have Senate hearings for years to come based on what Al Hodges submits in his court documentation next month if they do not release the $3.87 trillion that is set aside for us shareholders. I mean, trying to now follow the court case and make these movies. This is the first one, and if he has to file back to the judge with specifics of who was in that room, we're gonna make a second movie. Hope we tell this story so the real truth is told to the United States people and also the world. And thank God they finally put a global ban on counterfeiting stocks on the stock market with all these new laws. You know.